She just wanted to see Santa Claus up close, but she was humiliated. She fell to the ground and received a look of disgust in return. But someone saw everything and decided that injustice would not stand. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching from. Now, on with the story. Robert Ashford had never liked December. For him, that month represented everything that was most false in the world. Forced smiles, annoying music repeated ad nauseum, people feigning kindness for a few weeks before returning to their usual indifference. At 42, the owner of an empire built on sweat, tears, and sheer determination, Robert had transformed his aversion to Christmas into a true emotional armor. He didn't participate in holiday parties, didn't decorate his offices, didn't exchange gifts. For him, the 25th of December was just another day on the calendar, a day he preferred to be far away from any celebration. That December afternoon, the Westwood Galleria on the west side of Los Angeles was buzzing with the typical hustle and bustle of the weeks leading up to the holidays. Entire families walked through the wide, air-conditioned corridors carrying colorful bags, stopping at windows adorned with snowmen that would never make sense in the Southern California heat. Children ran between adults, their eyes shining at the sight of the flashing lights and gigantic ornaments hanging from the high ceiling. The air conditioning fought against the humid heat that seeped in every time the automatic doors opened, bringing with it not only the city's stuffiness, but also the noise of the chaotic traffic outside. Robert moved through this scene with the same closed expression as always, his eyes fixed on his phone, deliberately ignoring everything around him. He wore a light blue dress shirt, no tie, dark jeans, and expensive but discreet shoes. Nothing about him screamed wealth, but everything about him exuded power. He was the kind of man who didn't need to show off to be noticed. His erect posture, his firm walk, his clenched jaw, it all communicated silent authority. He was only there to resolve an issue with the manager of one of his anchor stores, a quick meeting about quarterly numbers that couldn't wait until January. As he walked through the ground floor trying to find the shortest path to the service elevator that would take him to the administrative office, Robert was forced to pass through the mall's central plaza. There, right in the heart of the shopping complex, stood the traditional Christmas scene, a red and gold throne, decorated, with lights that blinked in a steady rhythm, surrounded by artificial trees covered in fake snow and enormous cardboard presents. At the center of it all, a man dressed as Santa Claus received children, one after another, while photographers hired by the mall captured each moment for a fee. The line was long and organized by red velvet ropes, as if it were the entrance to an exclusive nightclub. Parents held numbered tickets they had picked up earlier, checking their watches every minute, calculating if they would still have time for the rest of their shopping after the photo with Santa. Vendors properly licensed by the mall circulated the area offering sweet popcorn, cotton candy, and artisanal panettones at inflated prices. Employees wearing red hats and elf ears distributed promotional flyers, always with that professional smile that didn't reach their tired eyes. Robert looked away from the scene, feeling the familiar irritation rise in his throat. He hated all of it. He hated the artificiality, the blatant consumerism, the transformation of something that should be intimate into a commercial spectacle. But there was something deeper behind his aversion, something he rarely admitted even to himself. That scene, those songs, that atmosphere of forced joy, it all transported him back to a Christmas Eve 28 years ago, when his life changed forever. Robert was 14 that distant December. His mother, Eleanor, worked as a seamstress in a small workshop in the garment district, taking double shifts to ensure her son had at least one decent meal a day. His father had left years before, leaving behind only debts and empty promises. At that time, Robert and his mother lived in a rented room in East Hollywood, where they shared a communal bathroom with 7 other families. Life was hard, but Eleanor always said that as long as there was dignity and honest work, there was hope. On that Christmas Eve, Eleanor had promised her son that for the first time, they would be able to buy a real present. She had saved a few dollars for months, hidden in a cookie tin in the cupboard. Robert, who had always been mature for his age, begged his mother not to spend that money on him, but Eleanor insisted. They went together to a department store, one of those big stores that to them represented an inaccessible universe of abundance. Robert would never forget the humiliation of that day. As soon as they entered the store, poorly dressed in simple, clean but visibly mended clothes, they were followed by a security guard. Every aisle they walked down, every shelf they touched, the man was there, a few feet away, as if they were potential criminals. When they finally chose a modest item, a notebook and a pencil case for school, and went to the checkout, the cashier looked at them with poorly disguised contempt, checked each crumpled bill Eleanor handed over, as if they were counterfeit, and commented loud enough for others to hear. "People like this shouldn't even be in here." Eleanor said nothing, just held her son's hand tightly, and they walked out with their heads held high. But that night, alone in the tiny kitchen while Robert pretended to be asleep, she cried. Robert heard every sob through the thin wall, and in that moment he made a silent promise. One day, he would be so powerful that no one could ever humiliate his mother again. One day, he would have so much money that no one would dare look at him that way. 3 years later, Eleanor passed away. It was quick, unexpected, devastating. A heart condition that no one knew she had, aggravated by years of overwork, poor nutrition, and constant stress. Robert, then 17, was left alone in the world. No family, no support network, just the promise he had made, and an unshakable determination to fulfill it. And he did. He worked 3 jobs simultaneously while finishing high school at night. He saved every penny. He invested, took risks, lost, tried again. At 25, he opened his first electronics store. At 30, he had a chain of 10 stores. At 35, he expanded to other states. Now, at 42, Robert Ashford was the owner of a conglomerate that included department stores, logistics companies, and stakes in several shopping centers across the country, including the Westwood Galleria where he now walked, trying not to let himself be affected by the memories that this time of year always brought to the surface. But there was a price for everything. Robert had money, power, professional respect, but he had no true friends. He had no family. He had no one with whom to share his achievements. He had turned his heart into a fortress as efficient at keeping emotions locked, away as his companies were at generating profit. And Christmas, with all its emphasis on love, family, and generosity, only served to remind him of what he had lost and the emptiness that no amount of money could fill. Lost in these bitter thoughts, Robert almost didn't notice when he stopped near one of the food court tables, strategically positioned with a direct view of Santa's throne. He sat down, not because he wanted to, but because he needed to review some emails before the meeting, and that seemed as good a place as any. He pulled his phone from his pocket, opened his inbox, and began scrolling through the messages. Numbers, reports, invoices, approvals, all very familiar, all very safe. It was then that something caught his attention. An irregular movement in the Santa line, raised voices, a commotion that clashed with the controlled atmosphere of the mall. Robert lifted his eyes from his phone, more out of reflex than real curiosity, and saw her, a little girl. She couldn't have been more than 8 or 9 years old, too thin for her age, wearing a cheap fabric dress that had once been blue but now faded to an indefinite shade. Her brown hair was tied in a messy ponytail, a few rebellious strands escaping in all directions. What stood out most, however, was her shoes, a pair of worn-out pink sneakers, the soles starting to separate from the rest, tied with laces that had clearly been repurposed from another pair of shoes because the ends didn't match. In her small hands, the girl held a clear plastic bag containing small fabric flowers, the kind made by hand, each with stems of covered wire and petals of felt in various colors. They were simple but carefully made, the type of craft people sell at traffic lights or in bank lines to earn a few dollars. The girl wasn't exactly in the line. She was on the sidelines, watching from a distance, like someone looking through the window of an expensive store, knowing they can never go inside. Every now and then she would approach a passing adult, timidly offer a flower, and receive a curt no, or simply be ignored. Robert saw her try to approach an elegant couple walking hand in hand. The woman clutched her purse tighter, and the man made a sharp gesture with his hand, as if shooing away an insect. The girl retreated, but she didn't give up. There was something in her eyes, a mixture of determination and desperation, that Robert recognized immediately. It was the same look he used to see in the mirror when he was younger, when he had to sell anything to help his mother, when hunger was a constant companion and dignity was all that was left. Then it happened. The girl, perhaps emboldened by a moment of distraction in the crowd, or perhaps simply tired of being invisible, took a few steps towards Santa's throne. It wasn't a bold approach, but a hesitant one, almost apologizing for her existence. She just wanted to see up close, perhaps, or maybe she had the naivety to believe she could make a wish like the other children. She didn't even get close. An employee, a man in his 30s wearing a red polo shirt with the mall's logo embroidered on the chest, intercepted the girl with the efficiency of someone who had done this many times before. Robert saw the man grab the child's arm, not with brute force but with enough firmness to communicate authority. He saw the employee lean in, say something in the girl's ear, and she turned pale. What happened next made Robert's stomach churn. The employee, no longer lowering his voice, spoke loud enough for the people around to hear. "This is only for people with a ticket, understand? For people who paid. You can't be selling these things here, let alone getting close to the children. Now get out of here before I call security." Some people in line turned to look. A woman with a child in her arms commented to her husband, not as quietly as she thought, "That girl's parents should be more careful, shouldn't they? Letting their daughter wander around the mall selling things." Her husband replied, shaking his head, "It's just a lack of responsibility. Then they complain when security treats them badly." The girl tried to explain something, her voice so low that Robert couldn't hear from where he was, but the employee didn't want to listen. He made a sharp gesture with his hand, as if shooing away an animal, and the girl took a few more steps back. That's when she tripped, maybe because of her worn-out shoe, maybe from the haste to obey, and fell to her knees on the cold mall floor. The bag of flowers slipped from her hands and rolled across the smooth floor. Some flowers scattered and were immediately trampled by hurried people passing by without even noticing. The girl remained there, on her knees, for a moment that seemed to last an eternity. Robert saw her lift her face, and even from a distance he could see the eyes glistening with unshed tears, the lower lip trembling, the cheeks red with shame. But the worst was yet to come. Santa Claus, that costumed man who supposedly represented kindness and generosity, looked directly at the girl on the floor and made a grimace of disgust. It wasn't subtle, it was deliberate, cruel, an expression of pure contempt directed at a child who had done nothing more than exist in the wrong place. Then Santa turned to the photographer beside him, said something that made the other man laugh, and returned his attention to the next child in line as if nothing had happened. To him, the girl no longer existed. She was just another inconvenience quickly removed, a minor hiccup in an ordinary workday. Robert was paralyzed, his hand holding his phone began to tremble. Something inside him, something that had been dormant for a long time, awoke with a violent force. It wasn't ordinary anger. It was something deeper, more visceral. It was the anger of all the times he had been treated like trash for being poor. It was the indignation he could never express when he saw his mother being humiliated. It was the accumulated rage of years watching the world trample the weak while applauding the strong. The girl finally got up, picked up the flowers that were still intact, ignored those that had been destroyed, and began to walk away. She wasn't crying openly, but she wiped her face with the back of her hand from time to time, trying to seem stronger than she surely felt. She walked to a more secluded corner of the central plaza, near a large planter with an artificial plant, and sat on the floor leaning her back against the cold wall. Robert watched as the girl opened the bag, counted the remaining flowers with trembling fingers, and did some sort of mental calculation. From the movement of her lips, it looked like she was murmuring numbers. Then she closed, her eyes tightly, as if making a wish or a prayer, and took a few deep breaths trying to compose herself. It was at that moment that Robert stood up. He didn't think, didn't plan. He simply found himself on his feet, walking towards that little girl. His steps were firm, but his mind was in turmoil. Why was he doing this? What did he intend to say? What did this girl have to do with him? They were questions without answers, but his feet kept moving, guided by something he couldn't name. When he got close, the girl looked up with frightened eyes. Robert realized she was used to being shooed away, kicked out, sent away. She expected more of the same. He stopped at a respectful distance, crouched down to be at her level, and asked in the gentlest voice he could manage, "Are you okay?" The girl blinked, confused by this unexpected approach. No one ever asked if she was okay. People either bought a flower out of pity or told her to leave. There was no middle ground. She nodded quickly, but the tears that escaped from the corners of her eyes contradicted her answer. "What happened over there?" Robert gestured discreetly towards Santa's throne. The girl looked down, ashamed. "Nothing, sir, I just wanted to see up close. But you're not allowed. I get it. It was nothing." But it was something, and Robert knew it. He knew because he himself had been in that girl's place many times. He knew what it was like to be treated as if your presence were an offense, as if your poverty were contagious. "What's your name?" he asked. The girl hesitated, but something in his voice made her answer. "Laura. Laura." Robert repeated the name, letting it resonate. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Laura. My name is Robert." She said nothing, just looked at him with those huge, frightened eyes, waiting for him to reveal his true intentions, waiting for the catch, the humiliation, for anything but genuine kindness. "Are you selling these flowers?" Robert pointed to the bag. Laura nodded. "Yes, sir. My grandma makes them. She's sick, needs medicine. My mom works a lot, but the money isn't enough, so I help by selling them when I can." The brutal simplicity of that explanation hit Robert like a punch. There was no drama, no self-pity, just the raw reality of someone who needs to survive. A girl of 8 or 9 who should be playing, watching cartoons, going to school, was here selling flowers to buy medicine for her grandmother. "How many flowers do you have left?" he asked. Laura opened the bag and counted. "7, sir." "How much for each one?" $5, but if you want to take more than one, I'll make it 4. Robert almost smiled at that childish attempt at negotiation. "I want them all. How much will that be?" Laura's eyes widened. "All of them, but there are 7. That's $35. Robert took out his wallet, but instead of looking for small bills, he took out a $100 bill and held it out to her. "Keep the change, and give me all the flowers." Laura looked at the bill as if it were an object from another planet. "Sir, I don't have change for 100, and it's not fair. It's too much. I can't accept it." There was pride in that refusal, the same pride his mother always had, and that touched Robert in a way he hadn't expected. "It's not charity, Laura. It's fair payment for beautiful flowers, and for you having the courage to be here trying to help your family. Take the money, go buy what you need for your grandmother, and keep the rest." Laura took the bill with both hands, trembling. She looked at Robert with such intense gratitude that he had to look away. Then carefully she took all the flowers out of the bag and handed them to him, one by one, as if she were passing precious jewels. "Thank you, Mr. Robert. Thank you so much. You don't know how much this helps. I can buy Grandma Celia's medicine and still have enough left for bread." Robert held the flowers, feeling their light weight in his hands, and something inside him broke. How many times had he and his mother been in this position? How many times had the kindness of a stranger made the difference between eating or going hungry, between getting medicine or enduring pain? And now, after building an empire, after accumulating more wealth than he could spend in several lifetimes, when was the last time he had truly looked at someone like Laura? When was the last time he had realized there were thousands, millions of Lauras across the country, invisible to people like him? But something still burned inside him, something that wouldn't be appeased by that purchase alone. The humiliation Laura had suffered, the way she was treated, the contempt on that Santa's face, all of it demanded a response. It demanded justice. "Laura," he said, his voice growing firmer, "those men over there, the Santa and the employee who pushed you, did they hurt you?" She shook her head. "No, sir, they just told me to leave, but I understand, you know, I didn't have a ticket. It wasn't my place." "Yes, it was your place," Robert said, and the intensity in his voice made Laura flinch slightly. He took a deep breath, softening his tone. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to scare you, but I need you to understand something. That mall, that space, it belongs to everyone. You have as much right to be there as anyone else. No one should have treated you that way." Laura didn't answer, but the way she bit her lower lip made it clear she didn't believe him. To her, places like that would always be for other people, people with money, with nice clothes, with the invisible but undeniable right to belong. Robert stood up, carefully tucking the flowers under his arm. "Do you need to go now?" "I do, sir. I have to take this money home so my mom doesn't worry. She works late today, but she left Grandma alone and I promised to be back soon." "I understand. Be careful, okay?" Laura nodded, already starting to walk away, but then she stopped and turned back. "Mr. Robert, you're a very good person. God will bless you." And then she ran off, disappearing into the mall crowd with the $100 bill clutched in her hand, leaving Robert alone with 7 fabric flowers and a whirlwind of emotions he didn't know how to process. He stood there for a long moment, looking in the direction Laura had gone, then slowly turned his face towards Santa's throne. The employee who had kicked the girl out was now chatting animatedly with another colleague, laughing at some inside joke. Santa continued his mechanical work. Pose, photo, next pose, photo, next. The world kept spinning as if nothing had happened, as if a child hadn't just been publicly humiliated. Robert started walking. Not towards the service elevator, not towards his meeting. He walked straight to Santa's throne, past the velvet ropes that marked the area, ignoring the disapproving looks from people in line. "Excuse me," he said, his voice cutting through the conversation between the employee and his colleague. "I need to talk to you." The employee turned, annoyed by the interruption. "Sir, you need to get a ticket if you want to take a picture with your child. The line is over there." "I don't want a picture. I want to talk about what happened here a few minutes ago with the little girl." The employee frowned. "What girl?" "The one you sent away. The one who fell. The one who was selling flowers." The employee's face hardened defensively. "Oh, that. Look, sir, I was just doing my job. There are rules here. You can't be selling things in the mall, especially not a child. I did what I had to do." "You pushed her." "I didn't push anyone. I just asked her to leave. If she fell, it was her own carelessness." Robert felt the anger rise again, hot and urgent, but he forced himself to maintain control. "And you," he turned to Santa, "you made a face of disgust at a child." The costumed man blinked, surprised. "What's that?" "You made a grimace of contempt when you looked at that little girl. I saw it clearly from here." Santa laughed, a short, humorless sound. "Man, you're tripping. I didn't even look at her. I have better things to do than pay attention to people selling stuff. If she got upset, that's her problem. This is for family kids, you get it? Not for just anyone." Robert felt those words like blades. For family kids. As if Laura didn't have a family. As if her family was worth less. As if poverty were a choice, a moral failing, something that disqualified a person from receiving a minimum of respect. "You just said," Robert spoke slowly, each word measured, "that this is only for family kids. Explain to me what you mean by that." Santa realized he might have made a mistake, but instead of backing down, he doubled down. "Do you want me to spell it out for you, man? This is a private event, paid for by the mall. Families pay to bring their kids here. It's not for some street kid to come and take advantage." "She's not a street kid," Robert said, his voice dangerously calm. "She's a little girl who lives with her mother and grandmother, who is trying to help her family. And even if she were, as you called her, a street kid, she would still be a child. She would still deserve to be treated with dignity." The employee interjected, starting to get nervous. "Sir, look, I don't know what you want, but you're disrupting the event. If you have a complaint, please see the mall administration." Robert looked at the employee, then at Santa, then at the supervisor who was starting to approach, alerted by the commotion. And then, for the first time since entering that mall, Robert Ashford smiled. It was a cold smile, the kind his competitors had learned to fear over the years, the smile of someone who knows exactly what their next move is. "The administration," he repeated. "Good idea. I think I really do need to have a talk with the administration. I'm sure they'll want to know how their employees are treating children." And then he turned and walked towards the service elevator, leaving behind a group, of confused employees, with no idea that the man who had just left was the very person who had the power to completely change their lives with a single decision. The elevator ascended in silence, with only the soft hum of the machinery and the ambient music that Robert no longer noticed. He looked at his own reflection in the polished steel doors, but he didn't fully recognize himself. The man standing there, holding 7 fabric flowers as if they were a trophy, was not exactly the same Robert Ashford, who had entered the mall half an hour earlier. Something had changed. A crack had opened in the armor he had spent decades building. The mall's administrative office was on the 3rd floor, in a restricted area where the general public never had access. It was a quiet hallway, with thick carpet that muffled any sound of footsteps, and varnished wooden doors with discreet plaques identifying each department. Robert knew this place well. After all, he was one of the main investors in the project, owner of 3 of the largest anchor stores, and had an ownership stake in the complex itself. But he rarely showed up in person, always, preferring to handle everything through his managers and lawyers. The general manager's secretary, a woman in her 40s named Marcia, looked up when Robert entered the reception area. She recognized him immediately, of course, and the discreet panic that flashed across her face did not escape his notice. "Mr. Ashford," she stood up quickly, smoothing her skirt. "We weren't expecting you today. Is there a problem? Can I help you with anything?" "I need to speak with the general manager." "No." Marcia hesitated. "Mr. Carter is on a conference call, but I can interrupt if it's urgent. Is it about the stores?" "No, it's about how your employees are treating children in the common area of the mall." Marcia's expression shifted from concern to confusion. This was clearly not the kind of issue she was expecting. "Children? Was there an incident?" "You could say that. How long will his meeting last?" "About 15 more minutes, sir." "Then I'll wait. And I want you to also call the events coordinator and the head of security. Everyone here in 15 minutes. Marcia nodded quickly and picked up the phone, her fingers dialing numbers with the efficiency of someone accustomed to corporate emergencies. Robert sat on one of the reception sofas, finally placing the fabric flowers beside him. He looked at them again, at the carefully stitched felt petals, at the covered wires that served as stems. He imagined Laura's grandmother, this Mrs. Celia, sick, sitting in some old chair, her hands trembling but determined, making each of those flowers in the hope that her granddaughter could sell them and bring a few dollars home. How long had it been since he had thought about people like that? How long since he had truly seen the invisible people who circulated every day through the city, the stores, the malls he owned? When had he become so detached from the reality that surrounded him? The door to the main office opened, and Thomas Carter, the mall's general manager, appeared. He was a portly man in his 50s, with a neatly trimmed grey mustache and expensive glasses. He wore an impeccable navy blue suit and exuded the confidence of someone used to being in charge. "Robert." He opened his arms in an expansive gesture, but the concern on his face was evident. "What a surprise. Marcia told me it was urgent. Did something happen?" Robert stood up. "You could say that. Have the others arrived yet?" "The events coordinator is on her way up now, and the head of security should be here in a few minutes. Shall we go to my office? Would you like some coffee?" "No, thank you. And I'd prefer to wait for everyone to arrive so I don't have to repeat the story." Thomas nodded, clearly disconcerted. In his 12 years as manager of that mall, he rarely saw Robert in person. Everything was always handled by email, calls, reports. Having the investor here unannounced, talking about an incident involving children, was not a good sign. A few minutes later, everyone was gathered in the meeting room. Besides Thomas, there was Patricia Scott, the events coordinator, a slim, elegant woman in her mid-30s, always impeccable in her high heels and beige suit, and Charles Mendez, the head of security, a tall, serious black man in his early 40s, who remained standing even when everyone else sat, as if in a permanent state of alert. Robert wasted no time with pleasantries. He told them exactly what he had seen, every detail of Laura's humiliation, from the moment she was pushed by the employee to the look of contempt from Santa Claus. He talked about how the girl fell, how the flowers were trampled, how the people around commented with disdain about irresponsible parents, without knowing the child's story. And he told them how Santa had said verbatim, that the space was for family kids, as if Laura didn't have a family, as if her poverty disqualified her from being treated with basic dignity. The silence that followed was heavy. Patricia stared at her own hands, clearly uncomfortable. Thomas's face was red, alternating between anger and concern. Charles, the head of security, was the only one who maintained a neutral expression, but his eyes revealed that this was not exactly a surprise. "Robert," Thomas began, choosing his words carefully, This is obviously unacceptable. We will launch an internal investigation immediately. The employee who acted inappropriately will be reprimanded, and as for the actor playing Santa Claus, we can terminate his contract today." "Terminate the contract," Robert repeated, his voice dangerously calm. "Reprimand the employee. Internal investigation. Nice words, Thomas. But tell me something. How many times has this happened before?" "What do you mean?" "How many times have poor children, poorly dressed, adults, humble elderly people been treated like this in this mall? How many times have they been followed by security, kicked out of common areas, looked at with contempt by employees?" Thomas opened his mouth to answer, but Charles, the head of security, spoke first. "Excuse me, Mr. Ashford, may I speak?" Robert turned to him. "Please. It's not the first time, and it won't be the last, unless there's a structural change in how we treat the public." Thomas looked at Charles with an expression of betrayal, but the supervisor continued, his voice firm. "I've worked here for 8 years. I've seen dozens of similar cases. Security guards are ordered to keep an eye on people who don't fit the mall's desired profile. Black teenagers are followed more frequently. Women in simple clothes are watched in stores. Elderly people who come in just to use the restroom are gently directed to the exit. It's not official policy, of course, but it's the culture that has taken hold." "That's not true," Patricia interrupted, defensively. "We have customer service training. We have inclusion protocols. We have protocols on paper," Charles cut in, "but in practice what matters is appearance. If you're well-dressed, you're treated well. If not, you're a potential problem." Robert leaned back in his chair, absorbing those words. It was exactly what he had suspected, but hearing it confirmed aloud by someone on the inside was different. "And you, Thomas, did you know about this?" The general manager hesitated, caught between the need to defend his management and the impossibility of lying to his main investor. We have thousands of people passing through here every day. It's impossible to monitor every interaction. But if there were excesses, we will correct them." "Excesses," Robert repeated. "You're calling what I call systematic cruelty excesses. And you know what bothers me most? It's that I am partly responsible for this." Everyone looked at him, surprised. Robert continued, "I built an empire focused on efficiency, on numbers, on results. My stores are trained to maximize profit. My malls are designed to attract consumers with high purchasing power. At no point did I stop to think about how these strategies would affect people like that little girl. People who aren't here to consume, but who still have the right to exist with dignity." "Mr. Ashford," Patricia tried, "the mall needs to be financially sustainable. We can't what? Treat everyone with basic respect? Is that what you were going to say?" Patricia backed down. "No, of course not. I just meant that there are operational challenges. Operational challenges do not justify humiliating an 8-year-old child." Silence fell over the room again. It was Thomas who finally asked, "What do you want us to do, Robert?" And that was the question, wasn't it? What did he want? Firing Santa and the employee would be easy. It would be quick. It would be a superficial solution that would change nothing fundamentally. Robert realized he didn't want quick fixes. For the first time in many years, he wanted something deeper, more real. "I want you to bring everyone who was involved in the incident here. Santa Claus, the employee who kicked the girl out, anyone else who saw it and did nothing. But I also want to hear from witnesses. Charles mentioned that this kind of thing happens frequently. There must be other employees who have seen similar situations. I want to hear from all of them." "That could take time," Thomas said, "and create a bad atmosphere among the staff. Then it will take time. And as for the atmosphere, maybe some discomfort is necessary for real change to happen." Thomas looked at Patricia, who looked at Charles, who kept his eyes fixed on Robert. Finally, the general manager nodded. "All right, I'll have everyone called, but it will take at least an hour to gather everyone." "No problem, I'll wait." While Thomas left to organize the summons, Robert was left alone in the meeting room for a few minutes. He pulled out his phone and looked at the unread messages. Dozens of them, from managers, partners, lawyers, all waiting for answers about deals, contracts, numbers. This was his normal world, this was the Robert Ashford everyone knew, but that Robert seemed very distant now. His impressions of the girl wouldn't leave his mind. Her eyes, that mix of fear and determination. The way she got up after falling, picked up the destroyed flowers without complaining, without crying openly. The way she refused to accept the $100 as mere charity, saying it wasn't fair. There was more dignity in that child than in many executives he knew. And there was more. There was the voice of his mother, Eleanor, echoing through the years. "Son, no matter how much money you have, never forget where you came from. Never treat anyone as if they are less than you, because we are all equal before God and in suffering." Robert had forgotten. Not intentionally, perhaps, but he had forgotten. He had built his walls so high and so thick that he had stopped seeing what was on the other side. And now, thanks to a little girl named Laura, some cracks had appeared in those walls. Charles returned first, bringing Robert a glass of water. "Mr. Ashford, may I ask a question?" "Of course." "Why are you doing this? Don't get me wrong, I think you're right. But men in your position usually prefer to handle these things discreetly, with money, with settlements. Why do you want to confront this directly?" Robert thought for a moment before answering. "Because I was once that little girl, not literally, but I've been in her shoes. I've been humiliated for being poor. I've seen my mother treated like trash by people who had more money, and I promised myself that when I had power, when I had a voice, I would do things differently, but I didn't. I spent the last few years just accumulating more power, more wealth, and I forgot why I wanted it all in the first place. Today, that little girl reminded me, and I can't just pretend I didn't see." Charles nodded slowly. "I respect that. And I hope you know that not everyone here thinks like Santa or that employee. There are good people working in this mall, people who care." "I know. That's why I want to hear from everyone, the good and the bad." In the following minutes, the meeting room began to fill up. First came the employee who had kicked Laura out, a young man named Vincent, visibly nervous, not knowing exactly why he had been summoned so urgently. Then came Santa Claus, still in partial costume, just without the hat and beard. His real name was Maurice, and he seemed annoyed by the interruption of his work. Then other people Robert hadn't expected entered, a woman in her 60s, wearing a simple janitor's uniform, her grey hair in a low bun. She was introduced as Gladys, one of the people responsible for cleaning the food court. A younger security guard, maybe 25, thin and with an apprehensive expression, and a sales associate from one of the clothing stores, a black woman in her 30s named Fernanda. When everyone was settled, some sitting, others standing for lack of chairs, Robert began, "Thank you for coming. I know some of you don't know exactly why you're here, so I'll explain. About an hour ago, I witnessed an incident in the Central Plaza near Santa's throne. A girl of about 8 years old was humiliated, pushed, and kicked out of a public area of this mall. I want to hear the version of everyone involved and those who witnessed it. But before that, I want to make it clear, I'm not here to punish anyone rashly. I'm here to understand what happened and why it happened." Vincent, the employee, timidly raised his hand. "Sir, I can explain. That girl was trying to sell flowers in the middle of the event area. There are mall rules against street vendors. I was just doing my job." "Did you push her?" "I didn't push her. I just held her arm and asked her to leave. She tripped on her own." "And why did you need to hold her arm? Was she being aggressive? Was she causing a problem?" Vincent hesitated. "No, but she was approaching the throne. I couldn't let her." "Why not?" "Because the event is for paying customers, not for just anyone." Those words, "just anyone," hung in the air. Robert looked at the others in the room, saw the discomfort on some faces, the veiled agreement on others. "Maurice," he turned to Santa Claus, You made a face of disgust when you looked at the girl. Why? Maurice crossed his arms defensively. Look, I didn't do anything wrong. I work with kids all day, every day. That girl was dirty, poorly dressed, trying to sell things. That wasn't the profile for the event. I just showed that she shouldn't be there. Showed, Robert repeated, with contempt, to a child. She wasn't a customer. She is a child. Shouldn't that matter more than whether or not she's a customer? Maurice didn't answer, but his gaze clearly said he saw no problem with what he had done. To him, there were children who deserved his professional smile, and children who didn't even deserve his attention. It was then that Gladys, the cleaner, asked to speak. Her voice was soft but firm. "Sir, may I say something? Please. I saw everything. I saw when the girl was pushed. I saw when she fell. But it wasn't the first time I've seen this happen. I've worked here for 15 years. I've seen many humble people treated badly. Elderly people who come in just to rest for a bit are sent away. Poor young people are followed by security guards as if they were thieves just because they wear simple clothes. Mothers who are breastfeeding are asked to do it in the bathroom because it bothers the customers. And we who work here, the ones who clean, who do the maintenance, we feel it too. Not in the same way, but we feel it. Some people don't even look us in the eye, you know, as if we were invisible. You who are listening to this story, if you were in Robert's place right now, what would you do? Would you fire those responsible immediately or try to understand the problem more deeply? Let us know in the comments. Gladys's words created a palpable shift in the room's atmosphere. Fernanda, the clothing store associate, spoke up next. I agree with Gladys. I've worked at the women's clothing store for 5 years. I've lost count of how many times I've seen humble customers treated with suspicion. Once, an elderly woman came in just to look. She was well dressed. There was nothing wrong with her. But because she was black, the manager told me to keep an eye on her, as if the color of her skin was an indication that she was going to steal something. Thomas interrupted, clearly annoyed. Those are serious accusations, Fernanda. Do you have proof? I have my word, and I have the word of other employees who have seen the same thing. But no one ever speaks up because they're afraid of losing their job. The young security guard, who had been silent until then, finally spoke. I'm new here. I've only been working for 6 months, but I've already noticed it. We're instructed to observe certain people. It's never explicitly said that it's because of their appearance or color, but everyone knows. Charles, the head of security, confirmed, It's true, and I'm ashamed to admit that I let this happen under my supervision. When I took over, I thought that's just how things worked, that it was part of the job, but it's wrong, it always has been. Robert absorbed every word, every testimony. This was bigger than Laura's humiliation. It was an entire system, a culture of silent discrimination, of veiled exclusion, of unequal treatment based on appearance, color, social class. Maurice, the Santa Claus, tried to defend himself. But we have to protect the mall's environment. We have to maintain a standard. A standard of what? Robert interrupted him. Of humanity? Because from what I'm hearing, the only standard being maintained here is a standard of cruelty, disguised as professionalism. Vincent lowered his head. Maurice turned red, but didn't reply. Patricia, the events coordinator, spoke for the first time since the witnesses had begun to speak. Mr. Ashford, I accept my share of the responsibility. I organize the events. I train the teams. If this culture exists, I have failed to combat it. Robert looked at her for a long moment. At least you acknowledge it. That's already more than some here can do. Thomas was clearly disturbed. Robert, what do you want us to do? We obviously need to change some things, but... Some things? Robert stood up, his voice rising. Thomas, it's not some things, it's everything. It's the way this mall operates, it's the way people are treated. It's the very business philosophy. He walked to the window, looked down at the movement in the mall. Thousands of people circulating, shopping, eating, living their lives. How many of them had been humiliated there? How many had felt small, invisible, inadequate? Do you know what that little girl said to me before she left? He continued, still looking out the window. She said, Mr. Robert, you're a very good person. God will bless you. She thanked me because I did the bare minimum that any decent human being should do. I treated her with respect. And you know what that told me? That she is so used to being treated badly that any basic gesture of kindness seems extraordinary. That should shame all of us. The silence that followed was profound. Robert turned back to the group. So here's what's going to happen. First, Maurice, your contract is terminated. Not because of what you did today specifically, but because your attitude shows you lack the empathy necessary to work with children. You will receive everything you are owed, but I don't want you in this mall. Again, Maurice opened his mouth to protest, but Robert raised his hand. It's non-negotiable. Vincent, Robert continued, you will be transferred to another department. You won't be fired, but you will no longer work in public-facing roles until you've undergone extensive training on empathy and inclusion. And this training won't be a 2-hour online course. It will be something real, meaningful. Vincent seemed relieved not to be fired, but also apprehensive about what was to come. As for the rest, Robert looked at Thomas, Patricia, and Charles. We are going to create new protocols. I want specialized consulting on social, inclusion, mandatory training for all employees, from managers to cleaning staff. I want educational campaigns for the retailers, and I want a full audit of how we are treating the general public, especially the most vulnerable. That's going to be expensive, Thomas observed, and it should have been done years ago. I have enough money for it. That's no excuse. Patricia asked, and the Christmas event? Do we continue? We continue, but with changes. From now on, any child can take a picture with Santa Claus, regardless of whether they've paid or not. We will hire a professional who understands that his job is to bring joy to all children, not just those with money. And we will create a program to bring children from underprivileged communities to the mall with transportation and snacks provided. I want this place to be truly inclusive, not just in marketing speak. The people in the room exchanged glances. Some seemed genuinely hopeful, others skeptical. Changes like these were rare, and many had seen similar promises forgotten as soon as the initial outrage passed. Robert noticed their doubt. I know what you're thinking, that this is an emotional reaction, that in a few weeks, I'll forget and everything will go back to normal. But you don't know me very well if you think that. When I decide on something, I see it through. And I've decided that I no longer want to be complicit in a system that crushes the weak. Gladys had tears in her eyes. Mr. Ashford, you don't know how much this means for people like me to be heard, to be respected. It's rare. And that's exactly the problem, Gladys. It shouldn't be rare. It should be the standard. The meeting extended for another 2 hours. Robert heard more testimonies, more stories of subtle discrimination, of small daily cruelties that most people never even noticed. Charles began compiling a list of necessary changes. Patricia, though still visibly uncomfortable, started sketching out ideas to make events more inclusive. Even Thomas, initially resistant, began to engage genuinely in the discussion. When everyone finally left, Robert was alone in the meeting room again. He looked at the fabric flowers still beside him, those small symbols of hope and survival. He took out his phone and did something he had never done before. He cancelled all his meetings for the week. He had more important work to do. Robert didn't go straight home that night. Instead, he walked around the mall until closing time, observing everything with eyes that seemed to see for the first time. He saw how the security guards really positioned themselves differently depending on who passed by. He saw how some salespeople were more attentive to certain customers and ignored others. He saw the small injustices that happened every minute, so normalized that no one questioned them anymore. When he finally left, it was past 10 at night. The parking lot was almost empty, just a few late-leaving employees heading home after their shifts. Robert got into his black Mercedes, but before starting the car, he sat there in the dark, thinking. The fabric flowers were on the passenger seat, and he looked at them as if they were a map to an unknown territory he needed to explore. He picked up his phone and made a call. On the other end, a female voice answered, "Mr. Ashford's office. Marina speaking." "Marina, it's me. I know it's late, but I need you to do something for me first thing in the morning." Marina Oliver had been his personal assistant for 5 years, efficient, discreet, accustomed to unusual requests, but nothing had prepared her for what came next. I need you to find a little girl for me. Name, Laura. I don't know her last name. She's about 8 or 9 years old, lives in or around the East Hollywood area, with her mother and sick grandmother. The grandmother's name is Celia. The mother works as a cleaner, probably double shifts. Laura sells fabric flowers at the Westwood Galleria. There was a pause on the other end. Mr. Ashford, this is unusual. May I ask why? You may, but I'd rather not explain over the phone. I just need to find her. Discreetly, I don't want to scare them. When you have the address, let me know. All right. I'll start tomorrow morning. Robert hung up and finally started the car. The drive to his penthouse in Brentwood was short, but it seemed to last an eternity. His mind wouldn't stop, processing everything that had happened, all the emotions that were surfacing after being buried for years. The apartment greeted him with its usual silence. 3,000 square feet of minimalist luxury, expensive but cold decor, all in shades of grey and white. Walls with works of art he had bought as investments, but never truly appreciated. A kitchen equipped with state-of-the-art appliances he rarely used, preferring to order in or eat out. It was the home of someone who slept there, but didn't live. Robert placed the fabric flowers in an empty vase in the living room, a crystal vase that had cost several $1,000s and now held those humble flowers of felt and wire. The juxtaposition was almost comical, but also deeply symbolic. He mentally photographed the scene and wondered when the last time something genuine had entered his home. He couldn't sleep that night. He lay awake in the king-size bed, staring at the ceiling, reliving every moment. Laura's fall, the glistening eyes holding back tears. Gladys's voice talking about being invisible. Maurice's words saying that space was for family kids. Every image, every sound seared into his memory with painful clarity. At 5 in the morning, he gave up on sleep. He got up, made coffee, sat on the living room sofa, and started to work. But not on the usual numbers and reports. This time he began researching social programs, inclusion, how companies could actually make a difference beyond empty marketing campaigns. He discovered initiatives from other countries, read academic articles, watched online lectures. It was as if a door had opened in his mind, and he was desperate to see what was on the other side. Marina called at 9 in the morning. "Mr. Ashford, I have information." Robert sat up straight. That was fast. Laura Christina Shaw, 9 years old, 4th grade, lives at 237 North Serrano Avenue, apartment 23, East Hollywood. Her mother's name is Beatrice Shaw, works as a cleaner at 2 hospitals, one in the morning and one at night. The grandmother, Celia Shaw, is 68, has diabetes and heart problems. Laura studies in the morning at a public school and in the afternoon stays with her grandmother or goes out to sell the flowers her grandmother makes. "How did you get all that so quickly?" "I spoke with some mall employees, showed them a photo I got from the security cameras. A cleaner knew the girl by sight, knew she studied at the neighborhood school. From there it was easier." Robert was impressed, but not surprised. Marina had always been efficient. "Good work. Now I need one more thing. Find out which hospital the mother works at night, and if possible, her exact hours." "May I ask why?" "I'm going to visit the family, but I want to do it when the mother is present. I don't want Laura and her grandmother to be alone with a stranger showing up at their door." "I understand. I'll find out and let you know." An hour later, Marina called again. "Beatrice works at Mercy General Hospital from 9 at night until 6 in the morning. But today is Thursday, and on Thursdays, she only works one shift, leaves the morning hospital at 4 p.m. and stays home until 5 a.m. the next day." "Perfect. Thank you, Marina. Mr. Ashford, may I be indiscreet?" "You may." "What's happening? In 5 years of working with you, I've never seen you get personally involved in anything that wasn't business, and now you're investigating the life of a 9-year-old girl. This isn't you." Robert smiled, a sad smile. "I know. Maybe it's time for me to find out who I really am, beyond the businessman." He hung up before Marina could reply. He looked at the clock. 11 in the morning. He had time. He went back to his room, changed his clothes, Dark jeans, a simple button-down shirt, casual shoes. Nothing that screamed wealth. He wanted to look like just an ordinary man. Before leaving, he took an envelope and put some cash inside. Not too much to seem ostentatious, but enough to make a difference. He added a card with his personal number. He thought about what to write, but decided to leave it blank. Some gestures don't need words. North Serrano Avenue was in a simpler part of East Hollywood. Old buildings, some well-kept, others not so much. Narrow streets with cars. Parked on both sides, small businesses on the ground floor. A bakery, a small market, a pharmacy. It was the kind of neighborhood where everyone knew each other, where neighbors still chatted on the sidewalks. Number 237 was a 5-story building, its paint faded, an intercom with some broken buttons. Robert pressed the button for apartment 23 and waited. He heard the static of the old line, then a woman's voice, tired. "Who is it?" "My name is Robert Ashford. I've come to speak with Mrs. Shaw about Laura." There was a long pause, fraught with apprehension. "Did something happen? To my daughter?" No, she's fine. I just would like to talk to you. I promise it won't take long." Another pause. "How do you know my daughter's name?" It was a good question, and Robert understood the fear behind it. A single mother, living in a simple neighborhood, a stranger showing up knowing her daughter's name. "I met her yesterday at the mall. I bought some flowers from her. I'd like to talk to you about it." The static on the line seemed to pulse with indecision. Finally, 3rd floor, door on the right. The apartment door opened. Before Robert even knocked, a woman in her 30s appeared, thin, her hair tied in a simple ponytail, wearing jeans and a plain t-shirt. Her face showed the marks of someone who slept little and worked too much, but her eyes were bright, intelligent, suspicious. Beatrice Shaw looked Robert up and down, clearly assessing whether he was a threat. "Beatrice?" he asked softly. "That's me. And you are?" "Robert Ashford. As I said on the intercom, I met your daughter yesterday at the mall. May I come in?" Beatrice hesitated but stepped aside. "The place is simple. We don't have anything of value to steal, if that's what you're looking for." "I'm not looking for anything but a conversation." The apartment was small, maybe 500 square feet in total. A living room that served as a living and dining area, with a worn but clean 3-seater sofa, an old TV, a plastic table with 4 chairs. Robert saw 2 doors, probably the bedrooms, and a tiny kitchen to the left. Everything was clean, organized, but it was impossible not to notice the poverty. The walls had damp stains, the floor was cracked in places, the curtains were faded. In a chair near the window, an elderly woman was sitting, her hands working on a fabric flower. She looked up when Robert entered, and he saw the same intelligent, suspicious eyes as her daughter. "Mum, this is Mr. Robert. He says he met Laura." Mrs. Celia put the flower aside but didn't get up. "Sit down, sir. Forgive me for not getting up, but my legs don't obey me like they used to." Robert sat on the sofa, maintaining a respectful distance. Beatrice remained standing, leaning against the wall, her arms crossed in a defensive posture. It was the stance of someone used to protecting herself, to not trusting easily. "Where is Laura?" Robert asked. "At school," Beatrice replied. "She'll be back soon. Why did you look for us? What happened?" Robert took a deep breath. There was no easy way to tell this story. "Yesterday at the Westwood Galleria, I saw your daughter being humiliated by the staff there. She was pushed, fell to the floor, had her flowers trampled, and was treated with contempt just because she was trying to sell some flowers." Beatrice's face paled. "She told me she had fallen, but she didn't tell me the rest. Did those miserable people lay a hand on my daughter? An employee held her arm and told her to leave. She tripped and fell, but that wasn't the worst part. It was the way they looked at her, as if she didn't have the right to be there." Tears began to roll down Beatrice's face, but she wiped them away angrily. "I always tell her not to go to the mall. I always say that's not our place. But she insists, says she sells more there. And I let her because I need the money. I need the money. That a 9-year-old girl can make selling fabric flowers because I don't earn enough working 16 hours a day." The bitterness and shame in those words hit Robert like a stab wound. Mrs. Celia also had tears in her eyes, but her hands continued working on the flower, as if the repetitive motion helped her process her emotions. "It's not your fault," Robert said. "The fault lies with a system that forces mothers like you to work to exhaustion and still not be able to provide the basics for their children." "And what do you want telling me this?" Beatrice asked, her voice laden with pain. "Do you want me to thank you for reminding me of what a failure I am as a mother?" "You are not a failure. You are one of the strongest people I have ever met, even though we only just met a few minutes ago." Beatrice shook her head, disbelieving. "You don't know me. You don't know anything about me. I know you work 2 shifts. I know you're raising your daughter alone while caring for your sick mother. I know that, despite all the difficulty, your daughter is polite, determined, and has a good heart. That doesn't happen by chance. That is the result of a mother who, despite all adversities, is doing an incredible job." Beatrice finally broke down. She sat on the floor, leaned her back against the wall, and cried. It wasn't a delicate cry, but deep sobs from someone who hadn't allowed herself to fall apart in a long time. Mrs. Celia dropped the flower and reached out to her daughter, but from her chair she could only touch her shoulder. Robert remained quiet, letting Beatrice release years of accumulated frustration. He knew that sometimes the greatest kindness one can offer is simply to be present in someone's suffering without trying to fix it immediately. When the sobs subsided, Beatrice wiped her face with the back of her hand and looked at Robert. "Why are you here? What do you really want?" "I want to help. I don't need charity. I'm not offering charity. I'm offering justice and an opportunity." Beatrice frowned. "I don't understand." Robert leaned forward. "I'm not just someone who was passing through the mall. I own 3 of the largest stores in that complex and have an ownership stake in the property. When I saw what they did to your daughter, I realized I was partly responsible for creating an environment where this kind of thing was allowed. And I decided to change it." Beatrice's eyes widened. You're the owner of the mall?" "Not exactly the owner, but one of the main investors. And just yesterday I started implementing changes. I fired the Santa who made a face of disgust at Laura. I transferred the employee who pushed her. I'm creating new service protocols, mandatory inclusion training, programs to bring children from underprivileged communities to participate in the events. But that's just the beginning." Mrs. Celia spoke for the first time since Robert had entered. "Sir, that's all very nice, but it doesn't change the fact that my granddaughter will still have to sell flowers tomorrow, and the day after, and the day after that, because we need money for food and for my medicine." "I know, and that's why I'm here with a proposal. Beatrice, you work as a cleaner?" Beatrice nodded, suspicious of where this was going. "What if I offered you a better job, with a decent salary, fixed hours, a proper contract, full benefits, a job where you don't have to kill yourself working 2 shifts, where you can be present for your daughter, where you have time to care for your mother?" "Doing what?" Beatrice asked, her voice filled with skepticism. "Cleaning your offices? Because that would still be cleaning, just for a rich person instead of a hospital." Robert shook his head. "No, I'm setting up a new department in my companies, focused on social responsibility and inclusion. I need someone who truly understands the needs of people living with difficulties. I need someone who can tell me when my ideas are empty, when my programs are just marketing. I need someone with real-life experience, not someone with an expensive degree but no grasp of reality. And I think you could be that person." Beatrice laughed, a humorless sound. "I didn't even finish high school. I got pregnant at 18, Laura's father disappeared, and I've been struggling to survive ever since. What qualifications do I have to work with you?" "The most important qualification of all. You've lived through all of this, and you're still here, fighting. You understand what it's like to be in need, what it's like to be invisible, what the dignity of an ordinary person is. You don't learn that in a university, you learn it by living it. And I need that knowledge if I want to make real changes." Beatrice looked at her mother, who also seemed incredulous. "This doesn't make sense. People like you don't just show up out of nowhere offering jobs to people like me." "People like me," Robert repeated, "have spent their lives forgetting they were once people like you. I grew up poor, Beatrice, very poor. I went hungry, wore mended clothes, watched my mother work herself to death and still be humiliated for being poor. The difference is that I got lucky. had opportunities and worked very hard. I built an empire, but in the process I also built walls around myself. Walls that protected me, but also isolated me from reality. Yesterday, your daughter helped me see those walls, and now I'm trying to tear them down." There was a long silence. Mrs. Celia was the first to speak. "This is all very nice, Mr. Robert, but experience has taught me that when something seems too good to be true, it usually isn't. What do you really want from us?" "I want to make a difference, and I've realized I can't do it alone sitting in my office, deciding what I think is best for people I don't even know. I need help. I need perspective. I need truth." Beatrice got up from the floor, still wiping away tears. "And if I say no, you'll just leave and forget all this?" "If you say no, I will respect your decision. But the changes at the mall will continue. Your daughter will not be humiliated again, regardless of whether you accept my proposal or not. That, I promise." It was at that moment that the apartment door opened and Laura entered, wearing a simple school uniform, a backpack on her shoulders. She stopped when she saw Robert, her eyes widening in recognition. "Mr. Robert!" she exclaimed, a huge smile lighting up her face. Then she looked at her mother, confused. "Mom, what is he doing here?" Beatrice opened her arms and Laura ran into them. "He came to talk to us, honey, about what happened yesterday at the mall." Laura's smile vanished. "I told you I fell. I'm sorry, Mum. I know you always tell me to be careful." "You did nothing wrong, Laura," Robert said. "The ones who did wrong were the adults who should have treated you better." Laura looked at him, then at her mother, trying to understand what was happening. Beatrice stroked her daughter's hair and made a decision. "Mr. Robert, I need to think about your proposal. It's a lot to take in at once, but I thank you for coming here, for caring. That in itself is more than most people would do." Robert nodded. He took the envelope he had brought and placed it on the table. "You don't have to decide now. My number is on this card. If you want to talk more, just call. And this," he pointed to the envelope, "is not payment or charity. It's an apology on behalf of all the adults who failed Laura yesterday. Use it for whatever you need." Beatrice looked at the envelope but didn't touch it. "How much is in there?" "Enough for a few weeks of medicine and food. As I said, it's not charity. It's an acknowledgement of an injustice." Laura broke free from her mother's embrace and walked over to Robert. Without warning, she hugged him, her small, thin arms wrapping around his waist. Robert froze for a second, then returned the hug, feeling something inside him break and rebuild itself at the same time. "Thank you, Mr. Robert," Laura murmured against his chest. "You're the nicest person I know." Robert had to blink quickly to hold back tears. "You're pretty amazing too, Laura. Don't ever let anyone make you feel otherwise." When Robert left the apartment 10 minutes later, he took more with him than he had brought. He carried the image of Beatrice finally picking up the envelope with trembling hands, of Mrs. Celia saying a quiet prayer, of Laura waving from the window as he got into his car. He carried the responsibility of having made promises he needed to keep, and he carried something he hadn't felt in a long time, hope that maybe it wasn't too late to be a better person than he had been. His phone rang when he was halfway back. It was Marina. "Mr. Ashford, you need to see this. A video is going viral on social media. It's about a little girl being humiliated at the Westwood Galleria. It already has over 500,000 views, and it's growing fast." Robert felt his stomach tighten. "Send me the link." Seconds later, he pulled his car into a gas station and watched the video. Someone had filmed the exact moment Laura was kicked out, when she fell, when the flowers were trampled. The quality wasn't great, but it was clear enough to see the contempt on Santa's face, the harsh way the employee treated her, the people around them laughing or simply ignoring it. The comments were a mix of outrage and calls for justice. Some people identified them all, others demanded that those responsible be punished. The video had already been shared by digital influencers, news pages, social activism profiles. In less than 24 hours, Laura's private humiliation had become a public debate. Robert called Thomas immediately. "Have you seen the video?" "I have. The press office is already calling me non-stop. Everyone wants a statement from them all. Robert, this could become a public relations nightmare. Or it could become an opportunity." Robert said, his mind already working. "Call a press conference for tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock, in the mall's central plaza, exactly where it all happened." "A press conference, Robert? I don't know if that's a good idea. Maybe it's better to wait for the fire to die down on its own." "The fire won't die down, Thomas, and it shouldn't. It's time to take responsibility publicly and show that the changes we started yesterday are real. Trust me." He hung up before Thomas could protest. He called Marina next. "I need you to organize something for me, something big." And as he explained his plan, Robert realized that for the first time in a long time, he wasn't thinking about profits or losses, corporate image or business strategy. He was thinking about doing the right thing regardless of the consequences. And that, he discovered, was both terrifying and liberating. The next morning at 8:45, the central plaza of the Westwood Galleria was unrecognizable. Instead of the orderly lines of families waiting for Santa Claus, there was a small stage set up, microphones positioned, cameras from various media outlets, journalists with their notepads, photographers adjusting their equipment. The news of the press conference had spread quickly, amplified by the viral video that continued to gain millions of views. Robert arrived 15 minutes before the scheduled time, accompanied only by Marina. He wore a dark grey suit, but no tie, a deliberate choice, between formal and accessible. Thomas was already there, visibly nervous, speaking in a low voice with the mall's press officer. Patricia, the events coordinator, was nearby, checking the final technical details. Charles, the head of security, was coordinating his team to keep the area organized. But there were others there too. Gladys, the cleaner who had witnessed everything, was sitting in the front row of chairs reserved for special guests. Beside her was Fernanda, the black sales associate who had spoken about discrimination in the meeting. The young security guard who had admitted to receiving instructions to watch certain people. And to Robert's surprise, Maurice, the former Santa Claus, was also there at the back, out of costume, looking much smaller and more vulnerable without the red suit and white beard. At 9 o'clock sharp, Robert took the stage. The murmur of the crowd gradually subsided into expectant silence. Dozens of eyes were fixed on him, cameras recording his every move, microphones capturing every breath. It was the kind of attention Robert was used to in corporate boardrooms, but this was different. These weren't shareholders or business partners. This was the real, public, ordinary people, those who would be affected by any decision he made. "Good morning," he began, his voice amplified by the speakers. "My name is Robert Ashford. I am a businessman, an investor, and one of the main partners in this shopping complex. I am here today to talk about an incident that occurred in this mall 2 days ago, an incident that was captured on video and that many of you have likely already seen." A reporter from a television channel raised her hand, but Robert gently interrupted her. "Please, let me finish first. I will answer all questions afterward." The reporter nodded and lowered her hand. 2 days ago," Robert continued, "a 9-year-old girl named Laura was humiliated in this very spot. She was trying to sell fabric flowers made by her sick grandmother, flowers she sells to help buy medicine and food for her family. She wasn't bothering anyone, she wasn't being aggressive, she was doing nothing more than existing in a public space. And yet, she was pushed, fell, had her flowers trampled, and was looked at with contempt by adults who should have known better." He paused, letting the words resonate. Some journalists began to write frantically. Cameras zoomed in to better capture his expression. "I was here when it happened, I saw everything, and the first thing I did was get indignant, outraged, wanting to punish those responsible, and indeed I took immediate action." The actor playing Santa Claus who showed contempt for the girl had his contract terminated. The employee who pushed her was transferred. But as I investigated further, I realized something disturbing. This was not an isolated incident. It was just the latest example of a culture of discrimination that has taken hold not only in this mall, but in many establishments across the country. Murmurs began to spread through the audience. Robert raised his hand, asking for silence again. "I discovered that humble people are regularly followed by security guards as if they were potential criminals, that black customers are watched more frequently, that elderly people who come in just to rest are gently asked to leave, that breastfeeding mothers are asked to do so in restrooms, that cleaning staff, the very people who keep this place running, are treated as invisible. And all of this happens under the guise of maintaining standards or protecting the environment. A journalist shouted, "Mr. Ashford, are you saying the mall has discriminatory policies?" "I'm saying that we, and when I say we, I include myself, have created a culture where certain people are welcome and others are not. Where a person's value is measured by their appearance, the clothes they wear, the color of their skin, their purchasing power. And that needs to change. Today." Robert took a deep breath before continuing. "I want to make a few announcements. First, starting this week, this mall will implement a mandatory diversity and inclusion training program for all employees, from managers to cleaning staff. It will not be a 1-hour online course. It will be a serious program conducted by experts that will last for months." Scattered applause began to emerge. Robert continued. "Second, we are creating a social inclusion committee composed of employees from different hierarchical levels as well as members of the community. This committee will have real decision-making power over mall policies and will be able to veto any practice deemed discriminatory." More applause, now more intense. "Third, we will implement a zero-tolerance policy for discrimination. Any employee at any level who is caught treating customers in a prejudiced or discriminatory manner will be immediately terminated. There will be no second chances when it comes to human dignity." The audience was now fully engaged, some standing, applauding, but Robert wasn't finished. "Fourth, this mall will become a truly public space. We will create common areas where people can rest without having to consume. We will bring in free cultural programming. We will partner with public schools so that students can visit with transportation and snacks provided. We want this place to belong to everyone, not just those with money to spend." The applause was now thunderous. Journalists exchanged impressed glances. Cameras panned to capture the audience's reaction. "And finally," Robert said, waiting for the silence to return, "I want to announce the creation of a $1 million fund, independently managed, dedicated to helping vulnerable families in the East Hollywood area and neighboring communities. This fund will offer emergency assistance, payment for medicine, school supplies, and professional training opportunities. Because if we truly want inclusion, we need to go beyond just allowing poor people to frequent wealthy spaces. We need to help them escape poverty." The silence that followed was charged with emotion. Then, slowly, the audience began to rise, and the applause turned into a standing ovation. Robert saw Gladys wiping away tears, saw Fernanda with a radiant smile, even saw Thomas, initially resistant, applauding with genuine approval. But then, something happened that Robert hadn't expected. From the back of the room, Maurice, the former Santa Claus, raised his hand. Robert hesitated but then waved for him to approach. The crowd turned to see what was happening. Maurice walked onto the stage with unsteady steps. He took one of the microphones, his hands visibly trembling. "My name is Maurice Santos. I was the Santa Claus who treated that little girl with contempt, and I came here today to publicly apologize." A murmur ran through the audience. Maurice continued, his voice choked with emotion. "When Mr. Ashford fired me, I was angry. I thought it was unfair. After all, I hadn't done anything that others weren't doing. But last night, I watched the video. I saw my own face, I saw the expression of disgust I made, and for the first time, I truly understood what I had done. I looked at a child, an innocent child who just wanted to sell some flowers, and I treated her as if she were less than human. And I have. No excuse for that." Tears began to stream down Maurice's face. "I was poor once too. I grew up in the projects, went hungry, wore donated clothes. But when I got this job, when I put on that costume, I felt important for the first time in a long time. And without realizing it, I started looking down on where I had come from, with the same contempt that others had once looked at me. I became the very kind of person I used to hate." Robert placed a hand on Maurice's shoulder, a gesture of silent support. "I'm not asking for my job back," Maurice said. "I don't deserve it. But if there's a way for me to make amends, for me to help with these changes Mr. Ashford is proposing, I would like to participate, because I need to make peace with that little girl and with myself." The silence that followed was profound. Then, from somewhere in the audience, someone started to clap. Others joined in. It wasn't an ovation like before, but a recognition of something equally important: the courage to admit a mistake, to apologize, to want to change. Robert approached the microphone again. "What Maurice just did is difficult. It's much easier to defend yourself, to find excuses, to blame others. Admitting failure, especially publicly, requires a strength that few possess, and I accept your offer to help. Everyone who wants to be part of this change is welcome." It was then that from the middle of the crowd a child's voice shouted, "Mr. Robert!" All heads turned. There, holding Beatrice's hand, was Laura. The girl had skipped school to be there, brought by her mother, who had made the difficult decision to leave work for a few hours to witness this moment. Robert stepped down from the stage and walked over to them. The cameras followed his every step, but he no longer cared. He crouched down in front of Laura, getting to her level. "Hi, Laura." "Hi, Mr. Robert. I saw you on TV last night." "Were you talking about me?" "I was talking about what happened to you, about how it was wrong, and about how we're going to make sure it never happens again to you or any other child." Laura looked around at all those people, all those cameras, all those eyes fixed on her. "Everyone is looking at me." "They are. But this time they're looking with respect, not with contempt. Do you mind?" Laura thought for a moment, then shook her head. "No. Because you're here." Beatrice, who was standing beside her, finally spoke, addressing Robert. "I thought a lot about your proposal. I talked to my mother. I even talked to Laura, although she doesn't fully understand, and I've decided to accept, but on one condition." "Which is?" "I'll work for you. I'll help with these inclusion programs. I'll do everything you asked. But you have to promise that you won't give up, that this isn't just for show, not just to calm the outrage on social media. I need to know that you are truly committed." Robert extended his hand. "I promise, and if I ever fail on this promise, you have my permission to call me out publicly." Beatrice shook his hand, and in that handshake was an agreement deeper than any corporate contract could express. A journalist approached, microphone extended. "Mr. Ashford, may I ask a few questions?" Robert stood up, but kept Laura and Beatrice by his side. "You may. What motivated you to do all this? Why not just solve the problem discreetly, as many companies do?" Robert looked at Laura before answering. "Because discreet problems lead to discreet changes, and discreet changes don't really change anything. I could have paid a settlement to the family, fired a few employees and moved on. But that wouldn't have changed the culture that allowed it to happen in the first place. I wanted to make noise because only with noise do people pay attention." "But aren't you afraid this will negatively affect your business? That wealthy customers will stop frequenting the mall? If customers stop coming because we treat everyone with dignity, then they are not the customers I want. And honestly, I think most people, regardless of social class, want to live in a more just world. We're betting on that." Another journalist asked, "And what about the little girl? Laura, how do you feel about all this?" Laura looked at her mother, who nodded encouragingly. "I just wanted to sell my flowers. I didn't want to cause any trouble." "You didn't cause trouble, sweetie," the journalist said gently. "The trouble was already there. You just made it visible." The questions continued for another half hour. Robert answered them all with honesty, sometimes admitting he didn't have all the answers, sometimes acknowledging his own past failings. He didn't try to paint himself as a hero, didn't try to minimize the gravity of what had happened. He just committed repeatedly to doing better. When the press conference finally ended, and the cameras began to be turned off and the journalists started to disperse, Robert stood there for a few more minutes, talking to people who approached him. Gladys thanked him with tears in her eyes. Fernanda said that for the first time in 5 years, she felt hopeful about her job. Charles, the head of security, shook his hand firmly and said, "We're going to do this right, boss." And Maurice, the former Santa Claus, approached Laura. He crouched down, as Robert had done, and said in a choked voice, "Laura, I was very mean to you, very cruel, and I'm sorry, I'm truly sorry." Laura looked at him for a long moment. Then, with the simple wisdom that sometimes only children possess, she said, "Everybody makes mistakes, sir. My mum always says that. The important thing is to fix it." Maurice couldn't hold back his tears. "Thank you, you're a better person than I deserve." Beatrice hugged her daughter, and Robert saw in that hug all the hope for a better future. A future where children like Laura wouldn't have to sell flowers to buy medicine, where mothers like Beatrice wouldn't have to work 16 hours a day and still barely survive, where people like Gladys would be seen and respected, where mistakes like Maurice's would be rare, and when they happened, they would be confronted instead of ignored. That night, Robert returned to his penthouse, but it felt different, less empty somehow. He looked at the fabric flowers still in the crystal vase, already starting to wilt a little, but still there, silent witnesses to a transformation that had begun with a simple act of kindness. He opened his laptop and started to work, not on spreadsheets or financial reports, but on concrete plans to implement everything he had promised. He contacted organizations specializing in social inclusion. He began designing the training program. He sketched out the guidelines for the inclusion committee. He defined the parameters for the relief fund. He worked late, but it wasn't the exhausting, empty work of before. It was work with purpose, with meaning. And for the first time in many years, Robert Ashford went to sleep feeling that his life had some meaning beyond accumulating more money. In the following weeks, the changes began to take shape. The training program was implemented, with intensive sessions where employees learned not only theory, but also heard real stories from people who had been discriminated against. Gladys was one of the guest speakers, emotionally recounting her 15 years of being invisible while cleaning the mall. The inclusion committee was formed, with representatives from all hierarchical levels. Beatrice, fulfilling her promise, became the coordinator of the new social responsibility department. Her first act was to review all of the mall's internal policies, identifying and eliminating those that, even if unintentionally, created barriers for low-income people. The relief fund began to operate, with hundreds of families benefiting. The selection process was designed to be dignified, without humiliation, without requiring people to prove their suffering in a demeaning way. And most importantly, the culture began to change. Not overnight, not perfectly, but it changed. Employees who once automatically followed certain profiles now paused to question their own biases. Managers who once ignored complaints of discrimination now took them seriously. The mall slowly began to become what it always should have been, a space truly for everyone. Of course, not everything was perfect. There was resistance. Some long-time employees resigned, unwilling to adapt to the new policies. Some customers complained on social media about the mall losing its standard. But for every voice of resistance, there were two voices of support. And most importantly, sales didn't drop as some had feared. In fact, they increased, because inclusion, it turned out, was not only morally right, it was also good for business. Robert and Beatrice became unlikely but effective partners. She kept him connected to reality, never letting him get lost in corporate abstractions. He gave her the tools and the power to make real changes. Together, they began to expand the model to other malls in the group, creating a movement that transcended just the Westwood Galleria. Laura went back to being a child. She stopped selling flowers because she no longer had to. Her mother now earned a decent salary. Her grandmother had access to the medicine she needed, but she didn't forget. Once a month, Laura visited the mall with her mother, not to sell but to participate in the inclusion program's activities, telling her story to other children, showing that even the most difficult situations can change. And on a Saturday afternoon, 3 months after that press conference, Robert was at the mall when he saw a scene that made him stop. A new Santa Claus, carefully selected and trained, was on his throne. In the line there were children of all kinds, some well-dressed, others not, some with disabilities, others not, a rainbow of colors and social conditions. And Santa received them all with the same genuine smile, the same warmth, the same attention. A little girl in simple clothes, much like Laura on that fateful day, approached timidly. Santa leaned in, took her hand gently and asked, "And what do you want for Christmas, Princess?" The girl, surprised by the kind treatment, smiled so broadly that Robert felt his heart clench. "I want my mum to not have to work so much," she said with the brutal honesty of children. Santa didn't laugh, didn't minimize it. Instead, he said, "That's a very beautiful wish. It shows you have a very good heart. And you know what I think? I think with people like you in the world, one day that wish will come true." Robert turned away, not wanting anyone to see the tears in his eyes. He walked to the common area they had created, where people could sit and rest without needing to consume anything. There, he saw elderly people chatting peacefully, mothers breastfeeding without being bothered, young people studying using the free Wi-Fi. It was a simple, even ordinary scene. But for Robert, it was proof that real change was possible. His phone rang. It was Laura using the simple phone Beatrice had been able to buy with her new salary. "Mr. Robert, guess what?" "What is it, Laura?" "I got an A in math. The teacher said it was the best grade in the class." "Congratulations, I'm so proud of you. It's because now I can really study. I have time, I have supplies, and I'm not tired all the time. Thank you, Mr. Robert, for everything." "You don't need to thank me, Laura. You gave me much more than I gave you." "What do you mean?" Robert smiled. "One day, you'll understand. Keep studying, okay? The world needs smart and kind people like you." After hanging up, Robert sat there for a few more minutes just watching life happen around him. He thought of his mother, Eleanor, and imagined she would be proud. Not of the money he had accumulated, not of the empire he had built, but of the changes he was finally making, the lives he was touching. Christmas was approaching again, and for the first time in 28 years, Robert didn't feel that familiar aversion. Maybe this year he would even decorate his apartment. Maybe he would invite Beatrice, Laura, and Mrs. Celia for dinner. Maybe it was time to start building the family he had lost, not of blood, but of choice and connection. Because in the end, that's what that little girl with her fabric flowers had taught him, that the greatest wealth is not in how much you have, but in how much you are capable of caring. That power without empathy is just tyranny in disguise. That real change begins when you stop looking up, obsessed with having more, and start looking around, seeing who needs help. And that sometimes the greatest lessons come in the smallest packages. A 9-year-old girl with worn-out shoes and a heart bigger than the world, who asked for nothing more than dignity, and in doing so transformed everything. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Robert and Laura has touched your heart. If you are moved by this journey of transformation and redemption, click the like button, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments what stood out to you the most. Was it Robert's courage in admitting his flaws? The strength of Beatrice and Laura in the face of adversity? Or Maurice's apology? Every day we bring intense stories like this, which reveal the deepest side of the human soul and remind us that it's never too late to change, to do good, to be the difference in someone's life. Thank you for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you in the next episode with another story that will touch your heart and make you reflect on the kind of person you want to be in the world.